Okay, welcome everybody. I think we need to figure out a way to start doing this on a roof terrace or something, because we're getting some beautiful days here. My name is John Gann. I'm president of ICCF. It's a pleasure to have you, some of you new faces, some of them old, back with us for another one of our briefings, for our Congressional briefing series this year, focusing on natural capital and America's and international conservation being in America's national security and economic interests. So this general theme we've been discussing, will be discussing, and have been discussing for the entire year. One of the topics of discussion today is actually something that really might be the most talked about topic in international conservation circles today, and that is the topic of food security. And we've got one of the foremost experts on food security from our longtime founding partner, Conservation International, and then from the largest corporation in the world, to also discuss sustainable supply chains and food security, which is Walmart. And we've been very fortunate in the past, and are fortunate again today, to have Walmart discuss some of their initiatives in agriculture. We had their chairman with us with Conservation International at a member dinner about, I think, 9 months ago, which was a wonderful discussion on the importance of sustainable supply chains to America's economic security and its economic engine. Just before we actually get the program started today, we're going to have a brief video that was done by Conservation International discussing the importance, the direct connection between international conservation and America's national and economic security. But before that, I wanted to quickly just thank a few people who are here with us today. As many of you know, ICCF has 40+ country members worldwide, and we've got some countries here represented from various parts of the globe from their embassies, from Angola and Argentina, Austria, Gabon, Honduras, Indonesia, Peru, and Senegal. So that's a pretty good collection, and I know a lot of these places, either being donor nations or developing countries, are extremely interested in this crucial issue of food security. From our Conservation Council today, we've got 3M, I think Tom Greer, I think he might be coming late, from AWF, Jamil, I think Jamil, you're here, there you are, way back there, African Wildlife Foundation. We've got Kelly from Unilever. Michael, I saw you come in here from Mars. We got Chris here with International Paper. Julie here with Feld Entertainment. And Julie Randall here with the Wild Foundation. Also from our founding partners, our advisory council, we have obviously from Conservation International, about to introduce Jill Siegel, who runs their government affairs shop, and Darcy Smith, who's there in the back. And I think I saw Nav come in from WCS. So there you are, Nav, right there. Anyway, without further ado, to introduce this film, afterwards we'll have about a 20-minute break and then start the program, is Jill Siegel, who runs government affairs for Conservation International. So Jill?
Thank you, John. As John said, I'm Jill Siegel with Conservation International, and I head up the U.S. government policy for Conservation International. Last June, we put together a short film called Direct Connection, and it is a film that features 3 of our board members, Rob Walton, who is the chairman of Walmart Stores, Wes Bush, who's the chairman, CEO, and president of Northrop Grumman, and Harrison Ford, who is an actor. I'm sure he needs no introduction, and by the way, he's making 2 new films this year, and it'd be great if everybody goes out and sees those. But we put together a short film about the direct connection between international conservation and America's economic and national security interests, because we found that a lot of people on Capitol Hill and elsewhere weren't making this direct connection as to why international conservation matters to your bosses and to your constituents that your bosses represent. So we put together this film, and we're very blessed at Conservation International to have an outstanding board of directors and a board that is very, very engaged in what we do here in Washington and throughout the world. So with that, if we can just dim the lights, and if you have any questions afterwards, we'd be happy to answer them. And here's our film, Direct Connection. Thank you.
There is a direct connection between international conservation and America's economic and national security interests.
There is a direct connection between international conservation and America's economic and national security interests. Hello, I'm Rob Walton, Chairman of Walmart Stores and Chairman of the Executive Committee of Conservation International. With the world's population expected to grow from 7 billion to over 9 billion over the next 40 years, doubling global demand for food, water, and energy, the United States and the rest of the world face enormous challenges. We must ensure that vital natural resources are protected and that ecosystems that supply us with essential goods and services, such as fresh water and food, are responsibly and sustainably cared for. International conservation plays a vital role in protecting these ecosystem services and is an investment in American workers and U.S. competitiveness. For example, many international conservation programs help stop the illegal extraction of natural resources that unfairly compete with American products. Stopping illegal logging alone could have a benefit to the U.S. economy of at least $500 million annually.
There is a direct connection between international conservation and America's economic and national security interests. I'm Wes Bush, CEO and President of Northrop Grumman and board member of Conservation International. The ability of our planet's ecosystems to provide the essential services of nature to human beings is fundamental to our global and national security. As the Earth's population grows, we know that we will stress nature's ability to support people. Competition for natural resources can lead to instability, conflict, and mass migration, and leave populations vulnerable to radicalization. If we fail to act, this stress on our sources of food and fresh water will translate into a threat to our national security. But we can make a difference through science-based efforts to ensure the health of our ecosystems that provide us with renewable natural capital. A failure to make these investments, which have very high returns, would have terrible consequences, burdening future generations with a level of risk that simply is not acceptable. Secretaries of State Baker, Powell, and Clinton, General Zinni, as well as the United States National Intelligence Council, all have publicly recognized that the security challenges of the future include the threat of resource scarcity. International conservation secures vital natural resources and protects ecosystems and the essential services they provide to people. This is a national security investment that supports regional stability. It cannot be deferred. The security of our children and grandchildren depends upon us acting now.
There is a direct connection between international conservation and America's economic and national security interests. I'm Harrison Ford, Vice Chairman of Conservation International. Billions of people are threatened by vulnerable and depleted ecosystems. The ability of our planet to keep up with the needs of people for food and fresh water is diminishing. Fresh water, natural pollinators, fertile soil, and sources of life-saving medicine. These ecosystem services cannot be replicated at any cost. They are essential for the benefit of humanity. Most major U.S. companies have undertaken sustainability efforts with real metrics and real investments to achieve their objectives. These programs have continued even through the economic downturn when many other investments were curtailed. But these companies cannot do it alone. Continued leadership and support for international conservation programs from the U.S. government is crucial. It might be tempting to defer these investments because of a smaller federal budget, but the risks are too great.
Protecting nature's assets is of strategic importance to our economy, our national security, our well-being.
Without further ado, John Buchanan, who's the Senior Director of Food Security, is going to, from Conservation International, will come and speak to us now. And after that, I'll introduce Beth Keck with Walmart. So, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking to the Congressional briefing series and have the opportunity to speak to you very briefly about some of the challenges related to conservation of natural resources and food security. And what I've been asked to do is provide a little bit, just a high-level overview of what are those connections between healthy natural systems and food production and food security. And what I hope to be able to demonstrate is just a quick summary of how, when so much of the world, the developing countries, are dependent upon agriculture and fisheries and other livelihoods that are directly connected to the health of nature, that international conservation and conservation of natural ecosystems that sustain those livelihoods has a real direct connection to America's economic and national security interests. So I'll provide a very quick overview of Conservation International, just to provide a bit of the context, some of the relationships between healthy ecosystems and food production and food security, and then just very quickly with some ideas on what are some of the possible solutions, and that'll provide hopefully a nice transition to our second speaker in Beth Keck. So for those of you who are not familiar with Conservation International, we are a private not-for-profit organization. We're headquartered just over the river in Crystal City. We work in about 47 countries around the world. We have a staff of roughly 900 employees, a network of about 1,000 partners, many of whom are represented here in this room. So it's a pleasure to have you here. And our mission, as you see here, is to conserve nature for the benefit of humanity. And the important piece here is that it's not just about nature for nature's sake. It's based on the fact that conservation of nature and healthy ecosystems is fundamental to human well-being. And it's really what we seek to do in our work, is to demonstrate that economic development, sustainable development, growth, versus conservation is not an either-or proposition. We have to figure out how to do both, and we have to figure out what is the right balance if we're to succeed in either. And that really takes us directly to the heart of food security. Food security and the ability to produce or acquire sufficient quantities of healthy, nutritious food necessary to sustain healthy, productive lives is really fundamental to any definition of human well-being. And today, we're not doing a terribly good job globally. There's about 1 billion people that will go to bed hungry tonight. There's about another 1 billion people that are technically fed, but their diets don't provide them enough the right nutritional balance and diversity to maintain healthy, productive lives. The vast majority of the foods insecure are in developing countries. The vast majority of those are the rural poor that depend primarily on agriculture, fisheries, livestock production, fish farming, activities and livelihoods that are directly dependent upon the health of natural systems. And really, at its core, food is a product of nature. So we all benefit from the foods that nature provides directly. Wild-caught or wild-harvested foods such as fish, Fish provides about 20% of the protein for roughly 20% of the population around the world. That percentage is significantly higher in many coastal regions of the world and in many island nations, where as much as 60, 70, 80% of protein consumption can come from fisheries. But healthy natural ecosystems also provide critical services, referred to as ecosystem services, in the form of fresh water that flows from healthy ecosystems, in the form of pollination. Roughly a third of global crop production depends on animal pollination, in the form of soil fertility and nutrient cycling, pest control. The value of natural pest control of crop predators to the U.S. ag sector is in the tune of $13 billion per year. So these are essential services that nature provides to the cultivation of food as well. Directly supports agriculture, fish farming, crop farming, livestock activities. And the challenge that we face is that with today's practices and technologies, that dependency is not always sustainable. And poorly managed food production, cultivation can generate impacts that erode the health of natural systems and can erode the foundation, the sources of sustainability that sustain those food production systems into the future. So agriculture is responsible for roughly 70% of freshwater withdrawals globally. It's one of the leading causes of deforestation, of water pollution, air pollution. Fisheries can be highly destructive depending on the practices they use, and the vast majority of our fisheries are essentially fully tapped out. Roughly half are fully exploited, and another third are overexploited already. And so this has a direct impact on the rural poor that depend upon these natural resources because they don't have the alternatives. They can't afford irrigation systems. They may not have the access to training in better management practices or technologies. They may not have access to farm inputs. So they tend to be more directly dependent upon the health of those systems. This also speaks to the food security challenge of tomorrow, and that is looking out over the next couple decades, how are we going to feed the additional 2 billion people that are going to join us on this planet by 2050? And we can't simply continue with practices today. We can't rely on expansion into new areas because in almost all instances that will generate significant environmental impacts. We can't continue to intensify or increase food production in existing areas using practices that rely on more water that may not be there, or that rely on the use of practices that create soil degradation or further pollution of water or air supplies. And so the challenge is really, how do we find the right combination of sustainable production practices, and how do we combine those with protection of key natural areas that are providing those ecosystem services that support food production into the future? And if you look at this map from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization that starts to show where are the problems of food insecurity the greatest, you can start to see and better understand. It starts to illustrate the direct connection between international conservation and America's economic and national security interests. Because some of the areas of the greatest challenge are in Africa, Southeast Asia, areas where the rural populations are heavily dependent on agriculture. In sub-Saharan Africa, 60% or more of the economically active population is related to agriculture, and in many rural areas that figure is significantly higher. We also see increasing conflict in parts of Africa related to competition over resources, in particular land and water. And so, for example, in parts of the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, as there's increasing weather variability, increasing drought, this is creating conflict between traditional pastoralists or livestock producers and farmers, as those pastoralists who have traditionally moved their herds throughout the year return to their traditional grazing lands and find farmers that are suddenly there now, that move there because those lands were better for farming. So it's generating enormous conflict. There are also significant areas that are at risk of further degradation and desertification in Africa and in parts of the Middle East. A couple years ago, the United Nations estimated that by 2020, 60 million people in Africa would be forced to migrate as a result of land degradation and desertification. When you consider a place like Afghanistan, where anywhere between a third and a half of the GDP is linked to agriculture and ranching, and the fact that 75% of those lands are at risk of degradation and desertification, you can start to understand, again, that degradation of those natural ecosystems will have a direct impact on agricultural-based livelihoods of the rural poor, can create further instability and challenge. And the challenges and the issues here are certainly complex. They're multifaceted. But one of the common threads is, again, the health of natural systems and how they support natural resource-based livelihoods. And just very briefly to set up some of the key solution areas that we see, the first thing we have to do is to recognize the value of nature and the contributions that nature makes to sustainable food production and rural livelihoods, and to protect those important areas. We clearly need to increase food production, but we need to do it with sustainable production practices that work with nature and not against nature. We need to increase food production in existing areas without expanding. But we also need to look at those lands that have been degraded and figure out how can we bring them back into production, how can we make them more useful, more profitable, and there are millions of hectares, enormous opportunities for recovery of those lands. And we need to figure out how do we reduce waste throughout food value chains, because there's enormous waste up and down that chain. We need to strengthen governance and management of natural resources, and in particular, we need to figure out how do we give the appropriate voice and role to those rural people that are most directly dependent upon natural resources so that they can have a say in the management going forward. Because without that participation, without that say, they really have no real incentive to sustainably manage those resources. We need to look at capacity building at multiple levels, from the level of individual farmers and farming families to help them improve their practices, to local and national governments, international organizations, again, to help them take advantage of some of the known solutions and technologies that are available to improve food production and make it more sustainable. In particular, in some of these rural areas, we need to focus on women, given the important role that they play in rural household and in food production. And then finally, we need to recognize that transitions to sustainability are not easy. They can engender some real costs and challenges for the individual producers. So we need to recognize those and figure out how do we help them make those transitions, and what are the right incentives that they need to make those transitions. And this is where I think the private sector can play a really critical role in sending the signals to both large scale agriculture and some of the large sectors out there, soy, corn, palm oil, and communicating to those sectors that the market really is interested in sustainability and wants to see improvements in these regard, but also to open opportunities for those small scale rural producers, to help them get access to market, to help them get access to finance and capital. Those are critical to helping farmers be able to make that transition to sustainability and overcome some of those initial startup costs. And that's really, I think, a perfect segue to my colleague, Beth Keck from Walmart, because Walmart has done such a great job in looking at its business and understanding what's its niche in sustainability and how can it take advantage of its business presence to send the right signals to the agricultural community that the market is interested in improved production, and then also to create those opportunities for the small scale producers. And Conservation International has had the pleasure of working with Walmart for many years, going back to 2004. We helped Walmart get started with some of the sustainable value networks in the early days of their sustainability work, and we continue this day to work with them on some of the key commodities, palm oil, and some of their other sourcing strategies. And so I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Beth Keck. So thank you.
Thank you, John, and both Johns, actually. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I'll just pick up, I think, the thread from John and continue on. What I would like to do today is actually just give you a little bit of context about Walmart and how we approach our business and what our business is all about, then how we approach sustainability, and then go right into this area of sustainable agriculture. And really, you can use Walmart as an example of how a business, as they said in the video, how we have really stuck to this theme of working on sustainability in our business and our supply chain, no matter what the economic situation is for our company and for the country or the world at this point in time. So let's move on to the next slide. Oops, here we go. I have the power to move on to the next slide. There we are. So just to give you a little context about Walmart itself, this is our first store. And this is a great year to be looking at this photograph because the first Walmart discount store was opened in Rogers, Arkansas in 1962. So this is the 50th anniversary for our company. And Sam Walton, who founded the company and was the driving force during all the early years, was very clear on what he was up to. He observed that there were underserved communities in rural areas in the United States, and he built a business based upon the underserved. And it's rather ironic today because now we look at some urban areas as the source of the underserved. This is Walmart today. You can see here that we've grown from that one store in Rogers, Arkansas now to having, actually we've got more than 10,000 stores open since, I need to update this slide, since this slide was made. And we're operating in 28 countries. And the newest part of the world for us now is to be operating in Africa. We purchased a majority interest in a company called Massmart, which has some operations in other countries in sub-Saharan Africa as well. So we're now across the globe and positioned for strategic growth in every continent. Our whole focus here has remained from our original mission is really building on that original mission of serving the underserved. Is today we're really focused on saving our customers or people money so they can live better. And we extend that into our view on sustainability as well. And we're very, very clear that what we want to do in the area, particularly of product sustainability, is that our customers should never have to choose between a product that's sustainable or not. And they should be able to just go into our stores and through the product specifications, through the work we do with our supply chain, just be assured that they're getting a product that has the most sustainable characteristics possible. And that's really what we're aiming for. So I think I missed a slide here. And so we've approached our sustainability efforts. We've organized them under 3 big goals. The first goal is focused on renewable energy, and it's our goal to become 100% operated with renewable energy in the future. And we're just making progressive steps there, and we appreciate all of the work that we've been able to do in places like California. We actually have our first solar roof store in China, so we're taking this everywhere we operate and looking how we can do projects here or other countries that can really build on each other. So we have a whole team focused on that. Another area we're focused on is creating zero waste. And an easy place to reduce waste, of course, is through packaging. And we have a diversion from landfill goal from the back of our stores that we're working very hard on and making great progress. And then the third area, which really relates to what John was talking about with Conservation International today, is selling products that sustain people and the environment. It was when we started really digging into this particular goal that it took us on the path to sustainability. And on our path to looking at what sustainable agriculture would look like for the country, for our company, you start out with, I want to work on sustainability, but then you say, well, what makes sense? And particularly if you're a company, you have to look at what makes business sense in particular. And it was really startling to us when we saw these really big global trends. And then we realized that more than 50% of our business revenue comes from our grocery business, so food. And even outside the U.S., that percentage is even higher. We're a grocer more than a general merchandise retailer this day. these days. And so it became quite obvious to us that we needed to be thinking about this and thinking about how we could be proactive today to make sure that we have a sustainable supply of food to sell to our customers tomorrow. So we decided that we would take a comprehensive approach. We did do an inventory of what was going on in our companies around the world, and it was a bit spotty. And so we sat down with Conservation International. Some of the other groups in the room here, WWF was a great partner as well, and really tried to find thought leaders throughout the world in our supply chain to talk about, how should we as our company be focused in this area. And we came up with 3 areas that we would put our efforts behind. One would be supporting farmers in their communities. The second would be producing more food with fewer inputs and less waste. And then third, sustainably sourcing key agricultural products. And if we could line up our activities behind that, then we could be making a positive impact in terms of this whole area of food security and business continuity for ourselves. So I'll now walk you through each of those 3 pillars and provide some examples of what we are doing to bring this to life. The first, in supporting farmers in their communities, we realized that there was this, a couple of needs here. There was this big intersection between small and medium farmers, particularly in emerging markets or developing countries, and getting them connected to market. That big issue of poverty alleviation, you can make a difference if you can get your product to market, because that's a big issue in many of the countries where we operate. So we've invested in a direct farm business model where we actually go out and we find small farmers. We work for aggregation in an efficient manner so they can be more directly connected to the marketplace. And it makes a huge difference, and I'll show you in a bit more in a minute on that. And to hold ourselves accountable, we've actually established public goals saying what we're going to do. So we're going to buy, by the end of 2015, we're going to be buying $1 billion in produce and other product from small and medium farmers, and we hope to reach 1 million farmers that way. Secondly, we've taken a goal that we will provide training to farmers in our global supply chain, and we want to reach 1 million farmers during this time period. And finally, we've taken an impact goal, because if we do all of this and still we don't have an impact or improved situation for the farmers in our supply chain, then it's really, not really established, not really addressed what we'd like to have in the long term, which is a more sustainable supply chain. So we're looking for an impact of an income improvement of 10 to 15% of those farmers, and working on ways of tracking that. So what's the reasoning behind this? Well, in Central America, we've got a really good, healthy produce business, and particularly in the produce area. And when we started looking at that business model there, we realized that it really had something to offer all of the businesses that we operate around the world. And this is a traditional fresh supply chain, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 to 5 different layers between the grower and the customer. And we decided that if we could take out some of those intermediaries between the grower and the customer, you can take cost and inefficiency out of the system. You can reduce the food waste. In a country like India, where like 40% of what's grown never makes it even to the marketplace because it's lost through the inefficient supply chain. And if you can improve that efficiency, then you have this wonderful win-win-win opportunity, because in the end, the farmer is going to become more prosperous. They're going to get better returns. We're going to be able to provide our customers with a fresher, safer food that's going to be much more attractive and higher nutrition level. And then finally, we should be able to improve our margin as well. And it's when you can find that winning combination that you can really take an idea of sustainability and move it into the business. And we're very committed to this business model. Let's see here. Oops. There we go. The second area that we're focused on is producing more food with fewer resources and less waste. And makes common sense when we have a lot more people in the world to be fed and clothed over the long term. And so what we're seeing that we can do on our part is be a market signal here. And so we have small producers that we're trying to reach and do more with. But this really is an area where we can try to have an impact on large producers as well. And so we're doing something that's very common sense. We're just asking the large growers that we buy from, how do you grow the food that we are buying from you and selling in our stores? Through a produce assessment. And we developed the assessment this past year, piloted it around the world, so we're doing this from a global viewpoint. And then our idea in the coming year is to really get this rolled out, then start analyzing information so that growers, particularly in specific regions, can see in a non-competitive manner, how they could improve and have better improvements in the supply chain. We also are doing investments ourselves, both with trying to reduce food waste in our own operations, as well as investments in our cold supply chain. Because if you have a cold supply chain, that can also improve food losses or reduce food losses. So we have a $1 billion investment commitment there. Then the third area is sustainably sourcing key agricultural products. And I would like to call out Conservation International. They've been a great partner to us on palm oil. Because you can take a global palm oil goal. Our goal here on palm oil is to convert all the palm oil that's going into the products that we sell, the private branded products we sell, to sustainable sources by the end of 2015. So that means if you buy a tube of lipstick, which has palm oil in it, or cookies, some of our private branded cookies or our cakes, that we're asking the suppliers of all of those products to go now to sustainable palm sources. And the idea is to get demand behind that sustainable palm oil that's now starting to be produced through the system. So this is another example of where we can use market signal to help make a change in the supply chain. And you may say, why palm oil? Well, it's one of the highest used fats today in product. It's used in almost more than 50% of the products that we sell. So if you start looking on the back of labels, you're going to see palm oil showing up everywhere. And it's coming from regions of the world that are suffering from deforestation due to the cultivation of that palm. And so if you can stop that deforestation, you can have a big impact on saving, the impact on our planet and all of the issues that John was talking about with that intersection with food security and security for our country as well. So we think palm is an important product for us to be taking a stand on and making a difference. Beef from the Amazon has a similar impact. If you look at another source of deforestation on the globe, it is a big reason for that is for beef that is sourced from the Amazon. We run a business in Brazil with nearly 400 supermarket locations, so we sell beef from Brazil. And so we believe it's incumbent upon ourselves to have traceability of where that beef is coming from and that it be sourced from sources that are not contributing to deforestation of the Amazon. Seafood, again, is another important protein for the world. And we know that for us to have seafood and fish in our store, it's got to come from sustainable sources over the long term, or actually the short term, or those fisheries are going to collapse. And we've already seen that with certain species before. So we're behind certification of fish. And so in our U.S. Business today, 76% of what we sell is coming from certified sources. And then for that gap, we've asked those suppliers to be focused on fishery improvement plans. So even if you don't have a certification scheme for your species or what you're selling to us, we want to make sure that there are plans and our suppliers are cognizant and thinking very actively and taking action on how they are managing those fisheries. And then another area we've gotten involved in is cotton. Cotton's a crop that uses a whole lot of inputs. And it's a crop that's grown in countries like Pakistan and India, where we source a lot of towels and sheets from. And it's a crop that's, a lot of smallholders as well. So if we can have a partnership at the farm level for improved use of inputs into the crop, that'll have a huge impact on the health of those farmers, and a lot of them are women in those fields. And then, our objective is to get that sustainably produced cotton into our supply chain so that the pillowcases and the sheets and towels that we're selling are coming out of that more sustainable supply chain. So those are just some examples of the activities that we have and projects and programs that we've put in place around those 3 pillars of sustainable agriculture. And we have a really strong commitment to this. This is an area that is reviewed by top levels of the company. Sustainability overall and sustainable agriculture is on top of mind of our food leadership. While we're busy today, running a business that's got to serve customers that come in every moment, we serve about 200 million customers every week. At the same time, we know that for us to have a healthy business down the road, that this is an important investment for our company. So I really appreciate this opportunity to be here and to speak with you and to meet with many of you. I've met several of you earlier before lunch, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I really thought that both those presentations, one talking about a problem and then Walmart talking about addressing this problem, is a real good summary and a lot of good ideas to think about when confronting these challenges. We'll do a quick question and answers. We have a few minutes here before our mandatory 1:15 shut-off time. I don't know if there's anybody who's got some questions for any of our speakers, but if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself, I think we've got some microphones that can go around. I'm not wearing my contacts, so.
Aljean Zadri with the
Aljean.
House Subcommittee on Africa. My question is to John. One of the key challenges that you identified was on governance. And I've been to Conservation International's projects, particularly the one in Madagascar, where you have a government that, there was a coup there, and there's some serious governance challenges. How do you get around the governance issue or tackle it head on such that the government is supportive of your projects and helpful and doesn't provide an environment that actually diminishes your work?
Great question. John, you want to come up here and answer it? So just everybody might be a little bit easier. Sorry.
That is an excellent question, a clear, concise question. I would love to think that I had a clear, concise answer to that. But you put your finger on one of the biggest challenges that we face in conservation. I don't think there is a single answer. I think we approach that issue just like we do with any of our other stakeholders, and that we have to demonstrate what's in it for them, what's in it for the government. Madagascar is a particular challenge. We've had historically very good relationships there with the government, but also down at the community levels as well. And we have to continue to build those relationships and manage them, and again, kind of find that common ground, that common interest. I can give an example from our Cambodia program, where they do an awful lot of work in a region called the Tonle Sap. It's the Great Lake in the middle of the country, which provides enormous quantities of freshwater fish for the whole country. We worked there for many, many years on biodiversity conservation and had some relationships with the government, but it was kind of at that level of conservation. It wasn't until our program started talking about the importance of maintaining those fisheries for the sustenance of the population, for protecting Cambodia's role in regional trade and the export of those fish, in how those fisheries impact votes in the region, that you start to find a lot more common ground. And I think that we have to be hitting that challenge at all levels, really.
Everybody's welcome to stay afterwards and chat with our speakers. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, well, I'm sure everybody else is also anxious to get back outside. Thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it, you being here. I know it's a very busy week and everybody's just getting back in, and look forward to seeing you at a congressional briefing again in the future very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.